The story of Joshua begins in the arid lands of Egypt, amidst oppression and suffering. Born into the tribe of Ephraim during the bitter Egyptian captivity, Joshua grew up witnessing the harsh reality of slavery. His original name was Hoshea, meaning salvation, but later Moses would call him Joshua, the Lord saves, a prophetic name that foretold his future role in Israel's history. Life in Egypt for the Hebrews was marked by forced labor, violence, and humiliation. Every day, Egyptian taskmasters imposed impossible brick quotas, denied them proper rest, and inflicted physical punishments. Hebrew families lived in constant fear of seeing their newborns thrown into the Nile, according to Pharaoh's decree. In this hostile environment, Joshua developed resilience and learned to trust in the stories about the God of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Moses returned from exile to free the people, Joshua emerged as a young man full of potential. Although the Bible does not detail exactly how Joshua was chosen to serve Moses, we can infer that his leadership qualities, courage, and faith set him apart from the others. Moses, guided by God, recognized in this young Ephraimite the characteristics needed for a faithful assistant. Perhaps it was during the initial confrontations with Pharaoh or in the early journeys after leaving Egypt that Joshua demonstrated his abilities, earning the trust of the great leader. Alongside Moses, Joshua received an unparalleled education in leadership. He closely observed how the great leader handled the people's complaints, sought divine guidance in times of crisis, made difficult decisions, and remained steadfast in his faith despite adverse circumstances. Moses, in turn, shared his wisdom, gradually entrusting Joshua with more significant responsibilities. This mentorship would shape the character that would later sustain Joshua in his own trials as a leader. During the exodus from Egypt, Joshua was not just a spectator. He witnessed the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, and the miracles in the wilderness. These experiences strengthened his faith in the God who keeps his promises and accomplishes the impossible. Unlike most of the people who frequently forgot divine miracles when faced with new challenges, Joshua stored each divine intervention in his heart, building an unshakable trust that would be essential for his future role. Joshua's first major opportunity to demonstrate his leadership came when the Amalekites, a nomadic desert people, attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. In the midst of the crisis, Moses entrusted Joshua with forming and leading Israel's first army. "Choose some men and go out to fight the Amalekites," Moses commanded. This battle revealed not only Joshua's military skills, but also a fundamental spiritual principle. While Moses kept his arms raised in prayer, the Israelites prevailed. When he lowered them from exhaustion, the Amalekites gained the upper hand. With the help of Aaron and Hur, who held up Moses' arms, Joshua secured his first military victory, learning that success in battle depended as much on strategy as on spiritual intercession. This lesson deepened when Joshua had the privilege of accompanying Moses partway up Mount Sinai. While the rest of the people remained at a distance, Joshua was chosen to follow the leader up to a certain point on the sacred mountain. Although he did not ascend to the very top to receive the tablets of the law, his proximity to this solemn moment demonstrated Moses' trust in him. During the 40 days that Moses was on the mountain, Joshua waited patiently, developing perseverance and loyalty. After Moses descended and the tragic incident of the golden calf occurred, Joshua received a special appointment. He became the guardian of the tent of meeting, the temporary sanctuary where Moses met with God before the tabernacle was built. The book of Exodus records his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. This role not only allowed him to be near Moses, but also to witness the intimacy of the relationship between the leader and God. In that holy place, Joshua learned the importance of constant communion with the Lord. a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. One of the defining moments in Joshua's life came when he was selected as one of the 12 spies sent to scout the land of Canaan. Representing his tribe of Ephraim, Joshua, along with 11 other leaders, explored the Promised Land for 40 days. They saw its riches, its fortifications, and its inhabitants. Upon their return, while 10 of the spies spread a discouraging report emphasizing the land's dangers and giants, only Joshua and Caleb maintained a perspective of faith. "We can conquer it," they boldly declared, reminding the people of God's promises. This minority stance nearly cost them their lives, as the enraged people wanted to stone them. However, this same faithfulness would ensure that they were the only ones of their generation who would eventually enter the Promised Land. The people's rebellion led to divine judgment. Israel would wander the wilderness for 40 years until all the adults who had rejected the promise perished. During these 4 decades of trial, Joshua remained steadfast in his faith and loyalty. As he watched an entire generation perish in the wilderness, including the other 10 spies, he stood firm in his conviction. This formative period, though difficult, refined his character and deepened his dependence on God. Joshua learned patience, perseverance, and the importance of remaining faithful even when those around him made the wrong choices. Over these years, Joshua developed a personal relationship with God that went beyond simply serving as Moses' assistant. He observed how Moses spoke with God face to face as one speaks to a friend. This example taught him the importance of seeking God's presence, listening to his voice, and depending on his guidance. Joshua's spirituality was not an exact copy of Moses. He developed his own leadership style, characterized by immediate obedience and unwavering trust in divine promises. As the 40 years of wandering came to an end, Moses, aware that he would not enter the Promised Land due to his disobedience at Meribah, began the transition of leadership. With tender yet firm wisdom, he presented Joshua as his successor before all the people. In a public ceremony, Moses laid his hands on Joshua, transferring part of his authority and commissioning him for the great task ahead. "Be strong and courageous," Moses exhorted him, "for you will lead this people to inherit the land I swore to give to their ancestors." At 120 years old and still full of vigor, Moses climbed Mount Nebo to gaze upon the Promised Land he would not be allowed to enter. After giving his final blessings to the people and formally commissioning Joshua, the great patriarch died in the land of Moab. Scripture beautifully states that the Lord himself buried him in a valley, but to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Israel mourned for Moses for 30 days, processing the loss of the man who had led them out of Egypt and through 4 decades of wilderness wandering. But the time for mourning had to end. The mission of entering Canaan could not wait indefinitely. It was then that Joshua received God's direct call. No longer would he receive instructions through Moses. Now, God would speak to him personally. "My servant Moses is dead. Now then arise, cross the Jordan, you and all these people, into the land I am giving to the Israelites." This divine commissioning was accompanied by powerful promises. God assured Joshua, "No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." He also promised that every place the sole of his foot stepped upon would be given to him, from the wilderness to Lebanon, and from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea. These divine assurances would serve as an anchor for Joshua in moments of doubt and difficulty that he would inevitably face. Perhaps recognizing the magnitude of the challenge before Joshua, God repeated the command to be strong and courageous 3 times in the first chapter of the book of Joshua. "Be strong and courageous" was not merely a motivational slogan, but a reminder that true strength came from divine presence and obedience to the law. God instructed him to meditate on the book of the law day and night to ensure his success. This triple command emphasized that Joshua would need courage not only for military battles, but also to face discouragement, uphold spiritual standards, and bear the responsibility of leading an entire nation. When Joshua conveyed God's instructions to the people, their response was overwhelmingly positive. "Whatever you command us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you," the Israelites pledged. This immediate acceptance stood in stark contrast to the frequent rebellions against Moses and demonstrated both the respect Joshua had earned and the maturity the people had developed during their years in the wilderness. However, even in their pledge of obedience, the people also exhorted Joshua, "Only be strong and courageous," echoing God's command. Wasting no time, Joshua began logistical preparations for the invasion. He instructed the officers to go through the camp, telling the people to prepare provisions, for in 3 days they would cross the Jordan. His meticulous organization revealed his strategic mindset. Unlike some leaders who mistake faith for recklessness, Joshua understood that trusting God did not eliminate the need for careful planning. At the same time, Joshua led the people in a renewal of their covenant with God. He knew that military conquest would only succeed if it was rooted in spiritual faithfulness. He reiterated the terms of the covenant, reminding the people of their obligations and the blessings that came with obedience. This spiritual renewal united Israel under a common purpose and prepared them for the challenges ahead. One specific matter required attention. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had already received their inheritance on the eastern side of the Jordan with Moses' permission. Joshua reminded them of their commitment to cross the river, armed and ready, ahead of their fellow Israelites until everyone had received their inheritance. These warriors, approximately 40,000 according to later records, affirmed their loyalty by responding, "Whatever you command us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Be strong and courageous." With these organizational matters settled, Joshua turned his attention to the initial military strategy. The first city they would face was Jericho, a walled fortress controlling access to the highlands of Canaan. Following Moses' example with the 12 spies, but exercising more discretion, Joshua sent only 2 men on a reconnaissance mission. Go and explore the region, especially Jericho. The 2 spies crossed the Jordan and entered Jericho, finding refuge in the house of Rahab, a prostitute who lived on the city's wall. Though her profession was morally questionable, Rahab would demonstrate extraordinary faith. When the king of Jericho sent messengers demanding that she hand over the spies, she hid them on her rooftop under bundles of flax and misled their pursuers. Their encounter with Rahab revealed something surprising. The inhabitants of Canaan were terrified of Israel's arrival. "I know that the Lord has given you this land," Rahab confessed. "A great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you." She acknowledged the miracles God had performed for Israel from Egypt until that moment and expressed her conviction. "The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." This declaration of faith from a Canaanite outsider underscored how widely God's deeds had become known. Moved by this newfound faith, Rahab sought protection for herself and her family when the Israelites took the city. The spies made a pact with her. If she kept their mission secret and tied a scarlet cord in her window, she and all who stayed in her house would be spared during the attack. This oath of protection, made in the name of the Lord, demonstrated divine mercy, extending even to those outside God's chosen people who recognized his sovereignty. Following Rahab's advice, the spies escaped through her window and hid in the mountains for 3 days until the search for them ceased. When they returned to the Israelite camp, they delivered a report that greatly bolstered Joshua's confidence. "Surely the Lord has given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Unlike the discouraging report given 40 years earlier, this one emphasized God's work in preparing the way for victory. With the spies' favorable report, Joshua ordered the camp at Shittim to be dismantled and the people to move toward the eastern bank of the Jordan. There they camped for 3 days, completing final preparations for the crossing. This period allowed Joshua to give detailed instructions on how the people should proceed. The instructions for the crossing highlighted both the spiritual and logistical dimensions of the operation. Joshua announced to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." This spiritual preparation reminded them that they were not merely embarking on a military campaign, but were participating in the fulfillment of a divine plan. Logistically, Joshua commanded the people to follow the Ark of the Covenant, keeping a respectful distance of about 1,000 yards so they could clearly see the path ahead. "For you have never been this way before." The priests were given a special role in this crossing. They were entrusted with carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized God's very presence among his people. Joshua instructed them that when they reached the riverbank, they were to step into the water and stand firm in the middle of the Jordan. This act required great faith, as the Jordan was at flood stage, overflowing its banks during the barley harvest season. The morning of the crossing arrived. As the feet of the priests carrying the ark touched the Jordan's waters, the promised miracle occurred. The waters flowing from upstream stopped, forming a wall far away at the town of Adam, while the waters flowing down toward the Dead Sea completely dried up. The riverbed was left dry, allowing the entire nation to cross on solid ground. This miracle at the Jordan had clear parallels to the Red Sea crossing generations earlier. Both events involved passing through miraculously parted waters, showcasing God's power over nature. However, while the Red Sea crossing marked the departure from slavery, the Jordan crossing signified the entrance into the Promised Land. If the first symbolized deliverance from sin, the second represented the beginning of a life of victory and spiritual inheritance. This symbolism would not have been lost on Joshua, who had witnessed both miracles in his lifetime. To commemorate this momentous event, Joshua ordered 12 men, one from each tribe, to take a stone from the dry riverbed where the priests' feet had stood firm. With these 12 stones, they built a monument in Gilgal, their first encampment in Canaanite territory. "These stones will serve as a lasting reminder for the Israelites," Joshua explained. "In the future, when your children ask, 'What do these stones mean?' you will tell them, 'Here Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground,' so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God." Once all the people had crossed and the priests carrying the ark stepped out of the riverbed, the waters of the Jordan returned to their course, overflowing as before. It was the 10th day of the first month, a significant date in the Israelite calendar, as it was the day when the Passover lamb was selected. The people camped at Gilgal, on the eastern border of Jericho, preparing for the next steps in the conquest. At Gilgal, God commanded Joshua to perform a fundamental act, the circumcision of all the Israelite males. During the 40 years in the wilderness, this practice had been neglected, and all the men born after the exodus from Egypt remained uncircumcised. Using flint knives, Joshua led this painful but essential rite, renewing the covenant with Abraham. The place was named Gilgal, meaning "I have removed the reproach of Egypt from you." This ceremony, performed at the threshold of enemy territory, demonstrated extraordinary trust in divine protection, as the people would be physically vulnerable during their recovery. After the circumcision and once they had healed, the Israelites celebrated Passover on the 14th day of the month, exactly 40 years after the first Passover in Egypt. This celebration marked the continuity between their initial liberation and the impending conquest, reminding the people that the same God who had freed them from slavery would now lead them to victory. The day after Passover, another significant milestone occurred. For the first time, they ate from the produce of the land of Canaan, unleavened bread and roasted grain. At the same time, the manna that had miraculously sustained them for 40 years ceased. This shift in provision signified a new stage. Israel would no longer depend on supernatural sustenance in the wilderness, but would begin to enjoy the abundance of the promised land, cultivating it according to divine instructions. As Joshua surveyed the area around Jericho, he had a supernatural encounter that would profoundly shape his leadership. Suddenly, he saw a man standing before him with a drawn sword. With courage, Joshua approached and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The response was striking. "Neither. I have come now as the commander of the army of the Lord." Immediately, Joshua fell face down to the ground and asked, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" The first instruction was the same that Moses had received at the burning bush. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." This encounter confirmed that the conquest would not be merely a human military campaign, but a holy war led by the Lord of heavenly armies himself. The divine instructions for conquering Jericho defied all conventional military strategy. Instead of assaults, siege engines, or traditional tactics, God commanded a supernatural approach. "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its mighty warriors. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horn trumpets in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the ram's horn, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse." Joshua relayed these instructions to the people without questioning them. For 6 days, the Israelites marched once daily around Jericho in complete silence, with the ark at the center of the procession, preceded by priests blowing trumpets. This unusual siege must have baffled both the defenders of Jericho and many Israelites, but Joshua had learned the importance of precise obedience, even when the instructions seemed illogical from a human perspective. On the 7th day, following divine orders, the Israelites rose at dawn and marched around the city 7 times. On the 7th lap, when the priests blew a long trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." With a deafening cry, the people obeyed, and the unthinkable happened. Jericho's towering walls, which had made the city seem impregnable, collapsed. Just as God had promised, the walls fell, leaving the city exposed to the Israelite attack. Amid the chaos and destruction, Joshua did not forget the promise made to Rahab. He ordered the 2 spies, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, along with all who belong to her, as you swore to her." Rahab and her entire family, her parents, siblings, and all her relatives, were rescued and placed safely outside the Israelite camp. This act of mercy in the midst of a war of destruction demonstrated that God's promises and those of his people must be upheld, even for foreigners who acknowledged his sovereignty. Scripture records that Rahab the prostitute, her father's household, and all that she had, Joshua spared. Later, Hebrew tradition states that Rahab married an Israelite named Salmon and became an ancestor of King David, and eventually the Messiah. Following the divine mandate of Herem, total destruction consecrated to God, Joshua ordered the complete annihilation of Jericho. Except for Rahab and her family, all the inhabitants, men, women, young, old, and even livestock, were put to the sword. The city itself was burned, and all its treasures except for the silver, gold, bronze, and iron objects consecrated to the Lord's treasury were destroyed. This execution of the ban fulfilled divine judgment against the Canaanites' abominations and demonstrated the seriousness with which Israel was to uphold spiritual purity. As a final act over this victory, Joshua pronounced a solemn curse. "Cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn, he will lay its foundation. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates." This prophecy would be fulfilled centuries later during the reign of Ahab, when Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho, losing his firstborn, Abiram, when he laid its foundation, and his youngest son, Segub, when he set up its gates. Joshua's fame spread throughout the region after this spectacular victory. Scripture records, "The Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land." The supernatural fall of Jericho served as divine confirmation of Joshua's leadership and a warning to the other Canaanite cities. The people of Israel, in turn, grew in confidence, seeing how God's promises materialize so powerfully. The victory at Jericho filled the Israelites with confidence, but they would soon face a painful lesson. Without consulting God, Joshua sent spies to the small city of Ai. They returned suggesting that only 2,000 or 3,000 men were needed to take it. Acting on this advice, Joshua sent 3,000 warriors who were unexpectedly defeated, losing 36 men and being pursued as far as Sebarim. This unforeseen defeat caused the hearts of the people to melt and become like water. Deeply distressed, Joshua tore his garments and fell face down to the ground until evening, along with the elders of Israel. In his desperate prayer, he questioned God. "Why did you bring this people across the Jordan, only to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to be destroyed? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan." This crisis revealed a vulnerable side of Joshua, who feared that when the Canaanites heard of this defeat, they would unite to destroy them. God's response was direct. "Get up, why have you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have taken some of the devoted things, they have stolen, they have lied, and they have hidden them among their possessions." God revealed that the defeat was due to the disobedience of someone who had taken forbidden objects from Jericho, violating the command to destroy everything except the precious metals destined for the Lord's treasury. Following divine instructions, Joshua organized a process the next day to identify the guilty party. Tribe by tribe, clan by clan, family by family, the selection advanced until Achan, son of Carmi, from the tribe of Judah, was singled out. Confronted by Joshua, Achan confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. I saw among the spoils a beautiful Babylonian robe, 200 shekels of silver, and a gold bar weighing 50 shekels. I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent." Messengers sent to Achan's tent confirmed his confession. The consequences of his sin were severe. Achan, along with his sons, daughters, livestock, tent, and all his possessions, were taken to the valley of Achor, where they were stoned and then burned. A great heap of stones was raised over them as a testimony, and the Lord turned from his fierce anger. This episode taught Israel that holiness and obedience were essential for victory. Once the camp was purified, God instructed Joshua with a new strategy to conquer Ai. "Do not be afraid or discouraged. Take all the fighting men with you. Arise and go up to Ai. I have given the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land into your hand. Do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, but this time you may take the spoils and livestock for yourselves." Unlike the strategy in Jericho, this time God permitted Israel to keep the spoils of war. Joshua devised a brilliant ambush. He sent 30,000 warriors at night to hide behind the city. At dawn, he and the rest of the army approached from the front. When Ai's defenders came out to fight them, Joshua and his men pretended to flee, luring all the inhabitants out of the city. At that moment, the ambush force entered the now unprotected Ai and set it on fire. Trapped between two Israelite forces, the warriors of Ai were completely defeated. Their king was captured alive, hanged on a tree until evening, and then his body was covered with a pile of stones at the city's entrance. After this victory, Joshua led Israel to Mount Ebal to fulfill a command given by Moses. There, he built an altar of uncut stones, offered burnt offerings and peace sacrifices, and inscribed a copy of Moses' law on the stones. The most significant event was the covenant renewal ceremony, with half the people facing Mount Gerizim and the other half facing Mount Ebal. Joshua read aloud all the words of the law, the blessings and curses, exactly as Moses had commanded. This ceremony, performed in newly conquered territory, reaffirmed that Israel was not merely a warlike people, but a nation whose identity and purpose were rooted in their covenant with God. News of Israel's victories spread throughout Canaan, striking fear into its inhabitants. The Gibeonites, a confederation of 4 cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim, devised a clever plan to save themselves. They sent a delegation pretending to come from a distant land, carrying old sacks, worn out and patched wineskins, tattered sandals, and dry, moldy bread. "We have come from a very distant land," they told Joshua. "Make a treaty with us." Joshua and the leaders made a grave mistake. They took some of their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. Trusting appearances, they swore an oath before the Lord not to attack them. 3 days later, they discovered the deception. The Gibeonites were actually neighbors living nearby. Although the Israelites wanted to attack them, Joshua upheld the oath. "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them." Instead of destroying them, he made them woodcutters and water carriers for the service of the tabernacle to this day. This episode taught the importance of seeking God's guidance before making decisions and of honoring promises, even when made in error. The alliance with Gibeon provoked a reaction from 5 Amorite kings of the south: Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem, Hoham of Hebron, Piram of Jarmuth, Japhia of Lachish, and Debir of Eglon. Fearful of Israel's growing power and viewing Gibeon as a traitor, they formed a coalition and attacked the city. The Gibeonites urgently sent messengers to Joshua. "Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly to save us and help us, for all the Amorite kings of the hill country have joined forces against us." Joshua responded immediately. He set out from Gilgal with his entire army and marched through the night, arriving at dawn. The Lord assured him, "Do not be afraid of them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." The battle was decisive. God intervened by sending large hailstones, which killed more enemies than the swords of the Israelites. During this battle, one of the most extraordinary miracles recorded in the Bible occurred. Seeing that nightfall was approaching and needing more daylight to complete the victory, Joshua declared before all Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Ajalon." Astonishingly, the sun stood still, and the moon stopped until the nation avenged itself on its enemies. Scripture states, "There has never been a day like it before or since when the Lord listened to a human being, because the Lord was fighting for Israel." The 5 kings fled and hid in a cave at Makkedah. Upon learning this, Joshua ordered the cave to be sealed with large stones while the pursuit continued. When the army returned, Joshua had the kings brought out, instructed his captains to place their feet on their necks as a symbol of complete victory, and then executed them. Their bodies were hung on trees until evening and later thrown into the same cave where they had hidden, its entrance sealed with large stones, which remain to this day. Seizing the momentum of this great victory, Joshua led a systematic campaign through southern Canaan. In rapid succession, he conquered Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir, applying the herem, complete destruction, to all these cities and their kings. So Joshua conquered the whole region, the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, and the slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. He completely destroyed everything that breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. When Jabin, king of Hazor, the most powerful city in northern Canaan, heard of Israel's victories in the south, he organized a massive coalition. He summoned Jobab, king of Madon, the king of Shimron, the king of Akshaph, and all the northern kings, from the mountains to the plains, south of Kinnereth, the Sea of Galilee, the western foothills, and the heights of Dor. This formidable army included Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Hivites. Scripture describes their forces as numerous as the sand on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots of war. Faced with this overwhelming threat, God renewed his promise to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them over to Israel, slain. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." This divine assurance was crucial, as Israel had never faced an enemy with cavalry and chariots before. Demonstrating tactical audacity, Joshua did not wait for the enemy's attack. He led his army on a rapid march northward and launched a surprise assault against the coalition forces encamped by the waters of Merom. This strategy prevented the enemy from capitalizing on their superior mobility. The Battle of the Waters of Merom resulted in another great Israelite victory. The enemy armies were completely defeated and pursued as far as Great Sidon, Misrephoth Maim, and the valley of Mizpah. Following divine instructions, Joshua hamstrung the horses, cutting the tendons of their legs, and burned the captured chariots. This action had a spiritual purpose: to prevent Israel from relying on these advanced weapons instead of depending on God, as King Solomon would later do. Returning from the pursuit, Joshua attacked Hazor, the head of those kingdoms. Unlike the other cities he left standing but uninhabited, Hazor was completely burned. Its destruction was strategically significant, as it was the most powerful city in the region. Modern archaeological excavations confirm a massive destruction of Hazor during this historical period, with evidence of an intense fire. The book of Joshua summarizes this phase of the conquest. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country, all the Negev, all the land of Goshen, the Shephelah, the Arabah, the hill country of Israel, and its valleys, from Mount Halak, which rises toward Zir, to Baal-gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and struck them down and put them to death. Joshua's military campaign lasted a long time, likely several years, as there was no city that made peace with the children of Israel except the Hivites who dwelt in Gibeon. All of them were taken in battle. Scripture provides a theological perspective on the Canaanites' resistance. The Lord hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel so that they would be utterly destroyed without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. This divine judgment responded to centuries of abominable practices, including idolatry, sexual immorality, and child sacrifices. At this stage, Joshua also exterminated the Anakites, giants, from the hill country of Hebron, Debir, Anab, and all the highlands of Judah and Israel. Only a few remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod, Philistine cities. By doing so, he eliminated the source of fear that had paralyzed the previous generation of Israelites. Although much of Canaan was now under Israelite control, significant areas remained unconquered. God said to Joshua, who was now old, "You are old, advanced in years, and there remains very much land to be possessed." These areas included the Philistine territories, the land of the Geshurites, all of Lebanon, and parts of Sidon. However, God instructed Joshua to proceed with the land's distribution, promising, "I will drive them out before the Israelites. You only have to divide it by lot to Israel as an inheritance, as I have commanded you." The territorial distribution process began with the recognition of the allocations that Moses had already assigned on the eastern side of the Jordan to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Then, the land west of the Jordan was divided among the remaining 9.5 tribes. The Levites did not receive a specific territory because the Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, but they were assigned 48 cities scattered throughout the country along with pasture lands for their livestock. An emotional moment occurred when Caleb, Joshua's companion during the spying mission 45 years earlier, claimed the land that Moses had promised him. At 85 years old, but as strong as the day Moses sent me, he requested the hill country of Hebron, inhabited by Anakites and fortified cities. Joshua blessed Caleb, recognizing his faithfulness, and granted him Hebron as an inheritance. Caleb then proceeded to drive out the 3 sons of Anak, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, demonstrating that faith in divine promises has no age limit. The tribe of Judah received the largest territory in the south, reflecting its prominence among the tribes. The tribes of Ephraim and the western half of Manasseh, descendants of Joseph, were granted fertile lands in the central region. However, they complained to Joshua, saying, "Why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for an inheritance, since we are such a numerous people whom the Lord has blessed so greatly?" Joshua wisely responded, suggesting they expand their territory by clearing forests in the hill country and conquering the areas where the Canaanites had iron chariots. A significant milestone was the establishment of the tabernacle in Shiloh, in the territory of Ephraim. This location would become Israel's religious center during the period of the Judges. With the sanctuary in place, Joshua summoned the 7 tribes that had not yet received their inheritance and rebuked their passivity. "How long will you delay going in to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, has given you?" To resolve this situation, Joshua sent a commission of surveyors, 3 men from each tribe, to explore and describe the remaining land, dividing it into 7 portions. With this detailed map, Joshua cast lots before the Lord in Shiloh, assigning territories to Benjamin, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. Some tribes faced challenges with their allotments. For instance, Dan had to conquer additional land in the far north when its original portion proved insufficient. Throughout this territorial distribution, Joshua demonstrated wisdom in resolving boundary disputes and balancing the needs of each tribe. The ultimate goal was to establish Israel as a confederation of tribes, each with its own land, but united by faith in God and obedience to His law. Once the territorial distribution was completed, Joshua oversaw the establishment of 2 special types of cities ordained by God: the cities of refuge and the Levitical cities. The 6 cities of refuge, Kadesh, Shechem, Kiriath Arba, Hebron, Bezer, Ramoth, and Golan, were strategically distributed throughout the land and provided judicial protection for those who had killed someone accidentally. There, the involuntary manslayer could find temporary asylum until being judged by the assembly and until the death of the reigning high priest. This institution balanced justice with mercy, preventing rash vengeance while ensuring that bloodshed was not left unpunished. The 48 Levitical cities, assigned by lot to the descendants of Aaron and the various Levitical clans, ensured that these tabernacle servants had residences in all regions of Israel. This strategic distribution facilitated their role in teaching the law and maintaining worship across the country. With these structures established and the land at rest from war, Joshua summoned the warriors of the Transjordanian tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They had faithfully fulfilled their promise to aid their brothers, fighting for many days until the conquest was secured. Thanking them for their loyalty and blessing them, Joshua sent them back to their territories east of the Jordan with this exhortation. Only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and all your soul. Upon returning to their lands, these warriors built a large altar near the Jordan. When the other tribes learned of it, they interpreted this act as apostasy and prepared for civil war. They sent a delegation led by Phinehas, son of the high priest Eleazar, who accused the eastern tribes, "What is this unfaithfulness you have committed against the God of Israel, turning away today from following the Lord by building for yourselves an altar to rebel against him?" The response revealed a misunderstanding. The God of gods, the Lord, he knows, and let Israel also know. If it was out of rebellion or unfaithfulness against the Lord, do not spare us today. They explained that they had built the altar not for sacrifices, but as a testimony for future generations, so that their descendants west of the Jordan would never say to those in the east, "What do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel?" The altar would serve as a visible reminder that, despite the geographical separation, they were all part of the same people, worshipping the same God. Satisfied with this explanation, Phinehas and the princes returned with their report. "Today we have understood that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this unfaithfulness against the Lord. Thus, you have saved the children of Israel from the Lord's hand." This episode demonstrated both Israel's zeal for religious purity and the importance of clear communication in maintaining national unity. Joshua's final years passed in peace. Settled in his inheritance in Timnath-Serah in the mountains of Ephraim, the aged leader watched as the people enjoyed the promised land. The Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, and Joshua, being old and advanced in years, prepared for his farewell. He first convened an assembly in Shiloh, where he reminded the people of all the blessings they had received. "Not one word has failed of all the good things the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass, not one of them has failed." He also warned of future dangers if they turned away from God. "If you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, his anger will be kindled against you, and you will perish quickly from this good land that he has given you." Sensing that his end was near, Joshua called for a second and final assembly in Shechem, a place of great historical significance where Abraham had received the first divine promise regarding Canaan. There, he recounted Israel's history from Abraham's calling to the conquest, reminding them of the divine interventions that had shaped the nation. He concluded with a challenge that would resonate through the ages. "If it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The people responded with renewed commitment. "We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God." Joshua, knowing the people's tendency toward inconsistency, warned them, "You cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God, a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion or your sins." Yet as the people insisted, Joshua established a solemn covenant, recording it in the book of the law and setting up a great stone as a witness. "For it has heard all the words the Lord has spoken to us. It shall be a witness against you, lest you deny your God." Shortly afterward, Joshua died at the age of 110 and was buried in Timnath-Serah. During his lifetime, another ancient promise was fulfilled. The bones of Joseph, brought from Egypt, were buried in Shechem, on the plot of land that Jacob had purchased centuries before. The death of Eleazar, son of Aaron and high priest during the conquest, marked the definitive end of the Exodus generation. The book of Joshua concludes with a positive assessment of his leadership's impact. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the works the Lord had done for Israel. This legacy of faithfulness, though not permanent, as the book of Judges would reveal, demonstrates the profound influence Joshua had on his generation. Joshua left a lasting impact as a model of faithful leadership. His life teaches timeless lessons about obedience, courage, the transition of power, justice, and commitment to faith. From slave to conqueror, from assistant to leader, Joshua completed the mission that Moses had begun, fulfilling the first stage of God's promises to Abraham. His name, sharing the same root as Jesus in Hebrew, foreshadowed another leader who would lead God's people into a far greater spiritual conquest. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep learning about fascinating biblical stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell to receive updates on new videos every week. Share this video with your friends and family. Help us spread these teachings that have inspired generations. Leave a comment telling us which part of Joshua's story impacted you the most, or which other biblical character you'd like to learn about in our next video. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the conquest of the Promised Land. See you in the next biblical story.